Greetings and welcome to the latest installment of the Senturus Knowledge Series. Today, we're excited to be presenting to you on the topic of deploying Power BI to the enterprise, helping you navigate the maze of options in Power BI as you scale in your organization. Our agenda today, after some introductions, we will get into the core of the presentation featuring Enterprise Power BI components, a discussion around Pro versus Premium, what do we need? We'll talk about data flows and their use for data preparation, and Dataset query modes for performance and security. Then stick around after that for a brief Senturus overview for those of you who may not be familiar with who we are and what we do. Some great additional, almost generally entirely free resources, and then we'll do the aforementioned Q&A at that point. So, introductions. I'm pleased to be joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Mr. Steve Reed-Pittman and Adam Harper. Steve, when he's not playing a stunt double for John Krasinski, brings more than 25 years of experience in business and technology to his roles at Senturus. From hands-on problem solving to high-level strategic planning, he's delivered a broad range of software and systems architecture, engineering, and integration projects, both on-premise and in the cloud. With constant attention to the intersection between business needs and technical options, he partners with our clients to help them use the right modern BI solutions for their current and future needs. Adam Harper is a senior Microsoft architect and a very active member of Microsoft advisory groups, including the Power BI Advisory Group and Power BI Customer Advisory Board. He owned the Microsoft BI platform at General Motors, worked as a solution architect for Duke Clinical Research Institute, and started Power Pivot development when it was first released for a pharmaceutical company. On top of all that, Adam has also worked with MicroStrategy and has vertical experience in both the telecom and oil and gas industry. My name is Mike Weinhauer, and I play a lot of different roles here at Senturus. One of my great pleasures is being the host of these webinars, and I'm pleased to be here with you today. So before we get into the core of the presentation, we always like to get a finger on the pulse of our audience here, and so we have some polls that we'd like you to interact with us on and let us know, where is Power BI currently used in your organization? And it's a select only one. Do you use it in one or more departments, one or more divisions or business units, enterprise-wide, or do you not currently use it? And it looks like kind of split evenly between one or more departments, one or more divisions, a small percentage of you enterprise-wide, and then a full, almost fifth not currently using it. Interesting. All right, thank you for sharing your insights there. And then we have a second poll before we get into the core of the presentation. Which versions of Power BI do you use today? And this is a multiple choice. You can select all that apply. Do you use the free desktop, do you use Pro, Premium, or none of the above? Okay, we got about 2/3 of you, and here are the results. So, about 2/3 using free and or Pro. Only about 20% using Premium. That's interesting. And then another 13% using none. All right, well, thank you for sharing, as always, your situation and some information about your enterprise, your organization. And with that, I will hand the microphone over to Mr. Reed-Pittman for the core of the presentation. Steve, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mike. Well, welcome everybody. And thank you, Mike, for the introductions. As Mike said, today we're going to cover deploying Power BI to the enterprise. And given some of the poll results, I can see that many of you are already pretty familiar with some of the features of Power BI. So I'm going to move kind of quickly through some of the initial content because part of that content is covering feature considerations, although that will be helpful for those of you who aren't using Power BI extensively in your organizations yet. It'll probably be familiar to a lot of you. But the first thing I want to do is provide a little disclaimer, just to remind everybody that Power BI is a fast evolving platform, and new features and enhancements are released monthly. And so it's always best to visit Microsoft's documentation site to get the latest and greatest feature information. Everything in today's presentation is current as of this moment, but Microsoft does have a way of adding features and also periodically expanding the coverage of features. So there sometimes will be features that were premium only that will become available to Pro licenses. So again, it's best always to check Microsoft for the latest information. So the first thing I want to talk about today is Enterprise Power BI components. Now, as most of you know, there is a free Power BI license. I'm not going to talk too much about the free license today because for the most part, it's not applicable in enterprise environments. The exception being if you're a premium, an organization using Power BI Premium, free licenses do come into play for consumers. So I'm going to cover just kind of some of the most commonly used components that you'll encounter when you're rolling Power BI out in the enterprise. That includes the Power BI Pro license, the standard Power BI service, Power BI Premium options, the Power BI gateway, the report server, and some other applications and services that you'll commonly find either in use or integrated with a Power BI rollout. Now, which ones of these you need for your organization really depend, and we'll talk a little bit about what the different reasons are for different pieces. So first up is Power BI Pro. Power BI Pro is a per-user license, and the kind of key thing that Power BI Pro provides is it enables users to do sharing and collaboration. Obviously, in an enterprise situation, you want to be able to share your reports. So essentially, every user in the organization needs a Power BI Pro license in order to access shared content. The exception to that is that content that is published in Power BI Premium, shared content in Power BI Premium actually can be accessed without a Pro license. And I'll talk a little bit about the nuances of that in a bit. But regardless of whether your organization is using Power BI Premium or not, every user in the organization who creates or publishes content does have to have a Power BI Pro license. So even in the situation where you use Premium, you will need some Pro licenses. Pricing on Power BI Pro is per user. Currently, that's $10 US per month for Power BI Pro licenses. Next up is the Power BI service. This is the standard cloud-based service for Power BI. There's no additional cost to this. It's the service that by default you will publish to if you're using a Pro license. You can also publish to the Power BI service with a free license. However, that content can't be shared with other people. So again, you really need Pro licenses in order to do the distribution and in order for users to consume shared content. One other note about the Power BI service is that it operates on a shared capacity basis. So unlike Premium, you do not have reserved compute resources for your content that's running in the Power BI service. So what that means is your workloads are distributed across the cloud along with everybody else's in that service. So you have less guarantee of consistency in terms of execution times and responsiveness. Next up is Power BI Premium. Power BI Premium is sort of like the Power BI service on steroids. And what Premium offers is it gives you dedicated cloud capacity. Like the regular standard service, it allows you to publish and share Power BI content. However, it does give you reserved dedicated capacity that you can control and administer internally. So it does give you the ability to have more control over the performance of your environment. Another big benefit of Premium is it allows users with Power BI free licenses to access shared content. So once you bump up to the Premium level, if your content is published in a Premium capacity, those reports can actually be accessed by Power BI free users rather than having to have Pro licenses for all of those users. However, as I said before, Pro licenses are still required for anybody who needs to publish content out to Power BI. So regardless of which level of the service you're using, you do have to have Pro licenses for distribution of content. or for publishing its content. Power BI Premium also adds some significant additional enterprise-level features. Some of those include paginated reporting. So if you need pixel-perfect reports, Power BI Premium adds paginated reporting. It adds an on-premises report server. So if you want to keep your Power BI content on site for security reasons or internal performance reasons, you can run Power BI essentially in an on-premises environment. Premium also allows you to bring your own data lake and a whole bunch more. The Power BI Gateway is up next. Gateway provides a secure data transfer path, so you can get to your on-premises data from the Power BI service. So, of course, Power BI services are all running out in the cloud, but for various reasons, you may want to keep your data on premises, either because you have data sovereignty reasons or regulatory reasons to keep it on-prem, or simply because you're not ready yet to migrate your data out to a cloud database. In those instances, you can install a Power BI Gateway. You can actually install multiple nodes for clustering to increase the redundancy and resiliency of that setup. And basically, the gateway allows the Power BI service to access your data for queries, and it does all of that in a secure, encrypted fashion. There's no charge for the Power BI Gateway. You can download and install it on any server. It does have to be installed on premises on a local machine. The Power BI Report Server. So the Power BI Report Server is actually included as part of Power BI Premium. It's an on-premise server for Power BI reporting. So again, if you don't want to store your content out in the cloud, you can install the Power BI Report Server, and it provides you the ability to do interactive reporting and paginated reporting in an on-premises mode. It's also very easy to move your content from the on-premises report server up to the cloud when you're ready. So it can also be a stepping stone if you want to start using Power BI internally, entirely on-premises, and then move out to the cloud later. Another reason to use the report server is that it can be used to supplement your premium cloud capacity. So you'll see in a bit, each level of premium carries a certain amount of compute resources, and the Power BI report server is licensed to be able to use that same amount of compute capacity in your on-premises instance. So you can run your own internal server in addition to using your premium capacity, and so that's a way to kind of supplement and leverage your license to greatest value. Some other applications and services that you might run into or find yourself connecting to as you roll Power BI out. One is SSRS, which is SQL Server Reporting Services. Reasons you might want to use SSRS. If you don't want to consume any of your premium capacity to do paginated reporting, you can either implement paginated reports in SSRS, or if you already have an existing SSRS instance, you can just keep that in place and run your paginated reports there. One thing about using paginated reporting in Power BI Premium is that it does have some static overhead when you enable it. So one reason you might consider not putting paginated reporting into your premium capacity is just for conservation of resources for interactive reporting. Another common connection you may need is SSAS. Many of you probably have existing SSAS environments. And if you do, you don't have to pull that data, you don't have to pull those models into Power BI if you don't want to. You can connect directly to existing SSAS data sources instead of migrating them into Power BI. One thing to know, though, under the hood is that Power BI actually does use the SSAS tabular model for its storage of models. So the underlying technology for modeling and accessing data is actually the same with SSAS and with Power BI. We want to talk a little bit about Azure services. So even though these are not Power BI specific services, they are commonly used with Power BI. And as you probably know, there are many, many Azure service options. And you can kind of keep an eye out in the future for us to do a webinar actually focused on the variety of Azure services and how they can be used with Power BI. But for the moment, I just want to touch on a few of these. Number one being the Azure SQL database. This is essentially SQL Server in the cloud. So if you are looking to migrate your on-prem SQL Server instances off-premises and up into the cloud, Azure SQL database is likely the path that you'll want to take. Azure also offers analysis services. So this is SSAS in the cloud. And although they're not exactly feature equivalent, SSAS, Azure AS, and Power BI's underlying use of the tabular model are all close to feature equivalent. So for the most part, you'll find that anything you can do in recent versions of SSAS, you'll be able to do in Azure AS and or directly in Power BI. I also want to talk a little bit about Azure Data Lake storage. So this is the high performance storage that Azure provides for big data. It's also the underlying storage that Power BI uses for basically everything. So by default, all of your Power BI reports, all of your data sets, all of your data flows, by default, all of those live in Azure Data Lake storage out in the cloud. And the last thing I'm going to mention here is Azure Data Factory, which provides some data movement and orchestration features. It's not a full-fledged ETL capability. So if you're using something like SSIS or accustomed to something like SSIS for your ETL, Azure Data Factory is not quite that, but it does offer some ETL capabilities, and it's really quite useful for moving data in and out of cloud sources. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about Pro versus Premium and what the best choice is. And the decision really comes down to a number of factors, but the key things to be aware of are that when you're deploying to the enterprise, you're going to need some user licenses. License users required for each user. Of course, they can be free users or Pro, but everybody has a license. The rules for free users, they can't publish shared content, and the only shared content that they can access is content that's in a Power BI Premium capacity. So as I talked a little bit about that before, but just want to reemphasize that free users are very limited unless you're using Power BI Premium. The other license is Power BI Pro. These users can publish shared content. They can publish content out to the standard Power BI service and also out to the Power BI Premium service. So they can publish to anywhere, basically, within Power BI. And they can also access shared content regardless of which service it's in. So the real distinction here in terms of using shared content is that Power BI Pro users can get content from anywhere, and free users can get content only from Premium. The other licensing you will need to consider is capacity licensing, which is what Power BI Premium is. Premium provides dedicated capacity, which guarantees memory and processing power that's always available and specifically dedicated to your workloads. So again, that gives you better control over performance and just the general operation of your Power BI enterprise environment. And again, you do still need Pro licenses for anybody who's publishing content, even in Premium. Just a quick overview of the different SKUs. So Power BI Premium has three, we could call them SKU classes. They're A SKUs, EM, and P SKUs. And they carry different prices and different features. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but we will have a slide here in a moment with some of those details. The main thing I want to point out here is that if you do want to embed Power BI content either into SharePoint or into Microsoft Teams, you must have an EM SKU or higher. So if you look at the diagram here, you can see that down at the bottom there, the MS Office apps, SharePoint and Teams are only supported in those higher level SKUs. And one other point about the distinctions between these SKUs, the A SKUs are actually billed on an hourly basis, whereas EM and P SKUs are billed monthly. So the advantage of that is that A SKUs can be used if you don't need your environment running 24/7. They allow you to have hourly billing, whereas an EM or P SKU is a 24/7 operation, and you're billed a fixed price on a monthly basis. This is the detail of premium SKUs that I promised. Again, I'm not going to go into much detail on this other than to point out that it's here, and it does outline the different levels, the kinds of resources that are allocated at those levels, and roughly what it costs on an hourly or monthly basis, depending on whether it's an A SKU or the higher level EM or P SKUs. And although it's not exact, the pricing is roughly equivalent in terms of hourly versus monthly. So like if you have an A SKU and you left it running for the entire month, at the end of the month, your total hourly cost will come roughly to the same amount as the monthly cost for the equivalent level of SKU at one of the higher levels. This is probably a good moment to just step back and point out that there's a lot of nuance to all of this, and it is constantly changing. So if you ever find yourself, having questions about some of these nuances, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to help take a look and see, and clarify some of the details. So, I'm trying to cover a fair amount of detail here today, but certainly we're just scratching the surface. And if you've spent much time with Power BI, there is a whole lot of detail, and it can be very confusing. All right, so when should you step up to premium? This is a common question. Often you'll start out rolling out to a department or division where if you don't have too many users, it makes sense to buy a bunch of pro licenses to accommodate your user base. But there's a question of when do you want to step up to premium? First clear case for premium is if you have more than 500 users. The monthly cost for a P1 premium SKU is basically the same as the monthly cost for 500 pro users. So if you have at least 500 users, from a cost standpoint, it makes sense to move to premium. And it also makes licensing much simpler because you don't have to track a whole bunch of pro users. You only have to track however many pro users are doing publishing, and everybody else can use free licenses at that point. Another reason to step up to premium, so even if you don't have over 500 users, you may want to use premium because you want dedicated resources. And you might want that for security reasons because you don't want to be sharing your resources out in the cloud, even though Microsoft does keep these instances, logically isolated from each other. You are running on essentially shared hardware ultimately out in Microsoft data centers. So if you want dedicated compute resources, Power BI Premium is the way to go to ensure that your environment, your workloads always have a known amount of actual capacity for execution. Another reason to go to premium, if you need features that are premium only, well, obviously you don't have a lot of choice in that case. You'll have to go to premium. Just a couple things on that count. Paginated reporting, as I mentioned earlier, is only supported at the premium level. So if you do need pixel perfect reports for corporate reporting purposes or otherwise, you'll have to go to premium. Or, as I mentioned when I was discussing some of the other applications and services, you could run SSRS internally as an alternative. So if you aren't ready to go to premium, but you do need paginated reporting, one alternative to that would be to use SSRS. Another reason to go premium if you want to do Power BI reporting on premises. So the Power BI report server, as I mentioned earlier, is licensed only if you have Power BI Premium. So if you want to do interactive or paginated reporting in an on-premises mode, you'll need a premium license. Premium also supports incremental data refreshes, which can make a big difference if you have a large amount of frequently refreshed data. I'm going to just skip over this slide because we've already covered most of these details in other slides, but this is just a partial list of some of the premium-only features. And as I said at the start of the presentation, always go and check the Microsoft website for the latest list of current features, particularly with premium. You always want to go in there and know what's available and what is available only to premium users. All right, so I'm going to start moving kind of down the sort of technical stack a little bit here into a little more detail. I'm going to talk about data flows for data preparation. And data flows in Power BI, they're sort of like you could think of them as like a lightweight ETL in the cloud. Although calling them lightweight is probably not fair because they are very powerful. And what data flows do is they extract data from your underlying sources. They can transform that data. They basically use Power Query. So if you're familiar with Power Query, data flows are basically Power Query in the cloud. And you can transform your incoming data, and that gets stored in the Azure Data Lake storage, which I described earlier. And so data flows essentially allow you to pull data from your underlying source systems and then work with that data in a fixed state in Azure Data Lake. So it gives you much higher performance once Power BI goes to access the data than it would if you were actually having to go out and query the source systems directly at the time of execution. Another ideal solution or an ideal use case for data flows is if you need to do rapid integration of disparate data from new sources. One scenario for that could be during a merger or acquisition. If you are bringing in data from a newly acquired company, a newly acquired division, data flows can help you integrate data from those new sources much more quickly than if you had to integrate directly on the back end. And the real beauty of data flows is they bridge the gap between enterprise and self-service data preparation. So I talked about SSIS just briefly a bit ago. And actually one thing I forgot to mention about SSIS is that you can bring SSIS workloads into the cloud now, and that's outside the scope of today's presentation, but just be aware that it is possible today to bring SSIS actually into the Azure cloud. There are some limitations involved in that, but it is possible. But data flows are sort of the new friendly cloud version of something like SSIS. And again, data flows do pull your data and store it in Azure Data Lake storage, which is kind of the central repository for everything that then feeds into Power BI. That's just a little bit more detail about data flows. I just want to talk quickly about a couple of benefits, particularly for data flows. One is that they provide reusability across multiple data sets in Power BI. So you can pull in the data for your data flow once, and essentially you can use it almost as a pseudo data warehouse or data mart, where you can have all of that data living in the Azure Data Lake, which you'll sometimes see referred to as ADLS, incidentally, Azure Data Lake Storage. And once your data flow is in the lake, you can create multiple data sets that reference it and pull data out of it. So it gives you a way to pull everything from your source systems on a fixed or recurring schedule, and then pull data into your data sets as needed. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about dataset query modes, and I'm going to specifically talk about them as they relate to performance and security. So one note, just at the bottom of the slide here, our own Mike Weinhauer recently did a complete webinar on modeling use cases in Power BI, where he goes into a great deal of detail on these query modes and more. So I would encourage you to take a look at that webinar in our resources library to get more detail on these. But I'm going to talk just a little bit about how query modes, what considerations you might have about which query modes to use in an enterprise environment. And we're going to talk about import, DirectQuery, live connections, and composite modes. So first up is import mode. This is the default mode for Power BI datasets. It imports data from the source system, which incidentally, that source system can be a data flow. So even though this diagram shows you importing data basically from back-end sources, you can also import data from a data flow. It stores that data within the Power BI data model. So it's basically immediately accessible. It's in memory when your Power BI report is running. So the import approach gives you very fast performance and really the best responsiveness in terms of queries. So it's great for interactive reports. The queries you run from your reports are executed against the imported data. Power BI doesn't go out to the back-end underlying sources when you're querying a data set in import mode. Good reasons to use it. If you're working with a small to medium amount of data, pull it in there. It's fast, it's efficient, it doesn't take up too much space. It's a good candidate for import. Also, if you don't have real-time requirements, it's a great choice for that because, again, it's not pulling from the source systems at the time of execution. So if point-in-time snapshots are what you need, like a daily snapshot or hourly or whatever, import mode can do the job for you without requiring a query out to the back end. Next mode is DirectQuery. Now, DirectQuery actually does perform a live query against your underlying data sources. The data is still modeled in Power BI, but when your report executes, it does actually go out to the underlying data source. Good reasons for using DirectQuery. If you have a really large amount of data and you don't want to pull all of that into a data set and store it in the data lake, you can go out and just query it directly as needed. It also can be useful for reports that are used less frequently or queries that are used less frequently. Another reason for DirectQuery is if you do have real-time data requirements, obviously you need a live query against the underlying data if you need to get up-to-the-moment information. So if you needed to do something like pull data from a transactional system, like a POS system, hopefully you're not doing that for reporting purposes, but if you are, you can use DirectQuery to pull that directly from the transactional system. Other reasons to use DirectQuery: source security. If you have row-level security enabled, implemented in your underlying data, DirectQuery ensures that your row-level security is enforced when users are running reports. So that's also a good reason to use DirectQuery. Data sovereignty is another reason. If you need to keep your data on premises or in your own private cloud, and you don't want that data being pulled into the Azure Data Lake for whatever reason, you can keep your data completely on the back end, and Power BI will query it and pull it in only as needed directly for your reports. Another option is live connection. Now there's just a small distinction between live connection and DirectQuery. What a live connection does is, like DirectQuery, it does a live query against underlying data. The distinction is that live connections work with the data that's already pre-modeled in the source. So you don't do any modeling within the Power BI report creation tool when you're using live connection data sets. You connect straight out to the underlying source. And the places you use live connection are in shared data sets, which live out in the cloud, out in the data lake. You also use live connections for external analysis services. So basically, if you have on-premises SSRS, you connect to that with a live connection. If you have Azure Analysis Services, which again is SSRS in the cloud, you'll also use live connections to get to that data. And last but not least, there's a composite mode. Composite models in Power BI give you a hybrid approach, which allows you to really kind of optimize the performance of your queries and your workloads. The query engine determines whether to use import or DirectQuery when it's executing reports. Reasons you might consider using a composite approach, composite model. If you have very large amounts of data, because the composite model allows you to keep some data on the back end, so it's not being pulled into the data lake, but it also allows you to selectively keep certain portions of the data within the lake for higher performance. One example of where this might come in handy is if you have a report that begins at a pretty high level of aggregation, but then has the ability to drill through and drill down to detail. So maybe you have a sales summary report, which then has the capability to drill down to finer levels of detail by geography or by owner, by sales managers, etc. You could use a composite model to pull the aggregate data that's used at sort of the highest level. You could pull that aggregate data into a data set in import mode, so it's ready to go, highly available, very fast, so your reports come up very quickly. But you can leave all the detailed data back in the back end and have the model use DirectQuery against that data. So then if and only if a user drills through and needs a higher detail level of data, then it will go pull that data from the underlying source, but you're not spending resources pulling a bunch of detailed data into the cloud if it's not likely to be used, or if you don't know which portions of it are likely to be used. So that covers some of the data set considerations. And in fact, this wraps up the kind of our overview for today. So I'm going to pass it back to Mr. Weinhauer to go over a few other things.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great presentation. Everybody, please stick around because we have some great information here for you and the aforementioned Q&A. Please do get your questions and put them in the question pane. Please put them in the question pane and not in the chat window, as we can't, it's hard for us to monitor all these different places and make sure we capture them accurately. But before we get into that, there's a few resources here that you might be interested in. The first of them being the Power BI Premium Calculator, following the link on this slide here. And what it allows you to do is it provides you some sliders that bucket your users between 3 different categories and gives you a rough outline of what your costs might look like. And then, of course, a link to sales if you want to talk to somebody about it. There's also a Senturus created reference guide for comparing all the various tools in the Microsoft suite. Well, I shouldn't say all the tools, but 44 tools where we've compared 29 different capabilities across those tools. And so you can see sort of a screenshot there. If you're interested in that, or our new offering around Power BI tenant and admin training, which includes Power BI Premium, you can email our own Kay Knowles at the email address you see there, knowles@senturus.com for those great free resources or more information. A little bit about Senturus before we get into the Q&A. We are the authority in business intelligence. We concentrate our expertise solely on business intelligence with a depth of knowledge across the entire BI stack. We are known for providing clarity from the chaos of complex business requirements, disparate data sources, constantly moving regulatory and business targets, having made a name for ourselves because of our strength at bridging the gap between IT and business users. We deliver solutions that give you access to reliable, analysis-ready data across your organization, enabling you to quickly and easily get answers at the point of impact in the form of the decisions you make and the actions you take. Our consultants are leading experts in the field of analytics with years of pragmatic real-world expertise and experience advancing the state of the art. We're so confident in our team and our methodology that we back our projects with a 100% money-back guarantee that is unique in the industry. We are a full spectrum BI services company offering the entire list of services that you see here, everything from front-end dashboards, reporting, and visualizations to back-end data preparation and data, helping you land on the proper hybrid BI environment, whether you're migrating, you need security or something else. And we develop software to enable bimodal BI and basically connectivity between things like Tableau and Power BI to Cognos, as well as expediting platform migrations. And of course, expertise across all of those on demand, as well as full spectrum training and mentoring. And we've been doing this for a long time, nearly 2 decades at this point, exclusively focused on business intelligence. We're working across the spectrum from everything from Fortune 500 to mid-market companies, solving business problems across virtually every different industry and functional area, including the Office of Finance, Sales and Marketing, Manufacturing, Operations, HR, and IT. You probably recognize several of the logos there, if not all of them. Our team is both large enough to meet all of your business analytics needs, and yet small enough to provide personalized attention. If you're interested in expanding your knowledge, which you all should be, visit senturus.com/Senturus resources to access all these great free resources on our website. Again, bookmark that, everything from webinars on all things BI to our fabulous up-to-the-minute, easily consumable blogs. Upcoming events, we head over to senturus.com/events, and you can see always what's kind of going on and what's coming up. The next one that's up on our docket is Cognos Framework Manager versus data modules. We're doing a comparison between those and feature gaps. That'll be happening on Thursday, June 25th at the same time as this webinar. So go on over there to register for that. And as I mentioned before, we do offer a complete BI training across Cognos Analytics, Power BI, and Tableau. If you're in need of corporate training, we offer training in all of these different modalities and can tailor it to meet your organization's needs. Everything from tailored group sessions led by an instructor to small group mentoring to instructor-led online courses, and of course, self-paced e-learning to round out the stack. So we can meet all of your different training needs. And then finally, before we get to the Q&A, are the last additional resources. We provide hundreds of different free resources on our website. Again, head over to senturus.com and you can find everything from product reviews to technical tips to our great blog and product demos and upcoming events. So head on over there and bookmark that and visit it frequently. All right, with that, we have come to the Q&A section. So gentlemen, what do we have first on the Q&A list?
So I'm just going to jump in here for a moment, Mike. And Adam, sure. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you for the Q&A because I know you've been tracking the questions and answers in the window. Everybody, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Adam Harper.
Okay, one of the first questions was, you currently have Power BI Premium, but how can we access a report server? So I'm assuming there you're speaking specifically to the Power BI report server. They do have a 180-day free trial for the Power BI report server, so you can go and download it from powerbi.com. But then how to access the actual license key, when you have a Power BI capacity, you'll have a capacity admin portal, and within that portal there's a link to get your actual license to be able to put it into the Power BI report server instance. Another one that was at the top here was, do Dataflows always use Azure Data Lake? They do on the back end. It's not actually visible by you with the standard Power BI Premium. It's stored in Azure Data Lake on the back end, not accessible outside of Power BI, but you do have the capability when you have Power BI Premium to bring your own data lake storage. And in that scenario, you would be able to store it in the Azure Data Lake, but then also pick it up from other services outside of Power BI itself. Vince had a question on, is the gateway required for DirectQuery? It is same way it is for import. Same data sources are required for a gateway is required for those same data sources. So if it's a cloud data source, Azure SQL, etc., then you don't need a gateway. But if it is an on-prem data source, you do need that gateway. And then another question was, they have, let me see, both multidimensional and tabular models are supported by Power BI right now. That is true. Assuming again that you're talking about Power BI connecting to one of these data sources on the back end, they can connect both to multidimensional or tabular models. That is correct. We had a couple more questions come in direct. What is the use case on data flows where you have a single entity versus a group of entities? For example, started making a group, you can only schedule refresh for the whole group. That is correct. So you wanted to refresh entities at different times. So you do need to create separate data flows for separate scheduling. That is the primary use case for multiple data flows utilizing the same data source, is if you want to schedule those data flows to refresh their data at different times. The use case for grouping them up together is obviously if you have a data warehouse that completes at a specific time and you want to refresh all of those individual entities. And so if everybody's not, again, familiar with the entity, an entity is just think of a single data source or a single table within your data source. So you have a data warehouse, you might have 10 tables that you're refreshing from. Those, depending upon your architecture, could be 10 different entities within a data flow. So again, if you want to refresh those all at once because your ETL completes at the same time for all of those different tables, then you would just create one data flow with all of those entities. But if you wanted to schedule them at different times, you separate those into separate entities. Another one was how the premium service impacts your customers around the world. For example, will someone in China have slower performance with premium versus pro? No difference in performance. Again, depending upon the size of your premium environment and how optimized it is, et cetera, versus the shared environment. If it is optimized, you'll see better performance regardless. Even when in China, your data is stored in a singular environment, so there are going to be some performance issues depending upon where they're accessing from. What we have seen with some companies, what they've done to kind of obfuscate that is utilizing, as Steve mentioned, those A SKUs. So an A SKU you can spin up as necessary, and that can be in different geographical regions. So you can spin that up as necessary, resize it as necessary. All of that can be automated and scripted out. So you could, as an example, at the end of the day, start scaling down your domestic environment, start scaling up your China environment, and then as more people get in, scale your environment up to the necessary size. So definitely ways to get around some of those performance issues globally. And we have another one: to view a report dashboard in the Power BI service, does the user need a Power BI Pro license? If they are accessing their own reports, no, they can just be a regular free user. If they are accessing a report that has been shared to them, they would need a Pro license unless that report or dashboard is published within a Power BI Premium environment. And again, that can be an embedded environment where an ISV or a company has created their own Power BI reports within their application, and they're allowing their end users to access those reports, that would be considered a premium environment. So again, a free user could access those. And the last one I see here is registering a Power BI API, a premium service, or a 365 admin function. So registering, actually getting the API connectivity done, is done through Office 365. It is the Azure AD portal. You go in and register an application there that gives you your client keys and secret key if necessary for configuring that Power BI API. I think that's all we got, Mike.
Great. All right, so you can advance to the last slide there, Steve. So first and foremost, thank you very much to our presenters today, Mr. Steve Reed-Pittman, and thanks for Adam Harper for handling the Q&A section here. And of course, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you found it informative. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next installment of the Knowledge series. And we hope to hear from you for any of your business analytics needs. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day. Bye now.